blocks from the White House. Donald Trump makes a campaign pit stop to help open his new international hotel in D.C. Syrian school children killed. How the deadly airstrike is part of a bigger battle taking place in the Middle East. Fiery finish. Flames consume a migrant camp in France, speeding up its evacuation. And plea for mercy. Pope Francis appeals to people to show mercy to refugees displaced by war, famine, and poverty. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 26, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Taking a break from the final sprint to Election Day, Donald Trump cuts the ribbon on his new hotel in Washington. Jason Calvi was in there for this morning's ceremony and is there now. Jason?
Brian, 13 days until Americans decide if Donald Trump will live in a different house on this road, the White House. But some are wondering, why is he taking a break from the battleground states to be here? Trump supporters say he's just doing his job. Donald Trump and family celebrate the grand opening of their newest hotel.
We were dramatically ahead of schedule on this project and under budget. We turned a property that had been neglected for decades and which was losing huge sums of money for the federal government into a major revenue producer and job creator.
The Trump International Hotel has transformed Washington's old post office pavilion, and Trump uses it to make a pitch to voters who want more change here in Washington.
Just about everything our government touches is broken or they break it. It's always over budget, behind schedule.
The $212 million hotel sits between the White House and the Capitol.
2 years ago, when we promised the city of D.C. that Trump would be coming to Pennsylvania Avenue in 2016, we had no idea what we were foreshadowing.
But
ho, ho! Donald Trump has got to go!
Protesters also came to Pennsylvania Avenue.
I don't want Donald Trump anywhere on Pennsylvania Avenue, especially here and especially down the road in the White House.
And Hillary Clinton weighing in on the hotel today.
He relied on undocumented workers to make his project cheaper.
Some Republicans worry Trump's already turning his attention to post-election business plans. But former Speaker Newt Gingrich says it's good for Trump to be here.
I think there was a symbolic message here that if you want business as usual and bureaucracy as usual, vote Hillary. If you want to change Washington so it can come in under budget and ahead of schedule, vote for Trump.
And this homeless vet sees it that way too.
This is a campaign trail. Anything he does is on the campaign trail. Doing his job, he's taking care of business.
And this Trump hotel actually opened for business last month. There are some reports that it's not doing as well as some of its nearby rivals. They have cut their rates. You can get a room here tonight, Brian, for $500.
Thank you, Jason Calvi. And political director Lauren Ashburn reports on the tightening race in Florida and in other states tonight.
Donald Trump isn't the only one breaking the traditional election playbook. His running mate, Mike Pence, is also taking a detour to reliably Republican Utah. That's where Trump is holding on to a less than comfortable lead. Trump's work in battleground states may be paying off. The latest New Hampshire poll shows him closing the gap by 4 points. And in Florida, a new poll shows him with a 2-point lead. Both polls within the margin of error.
It's great to be here in Lake Worth.
Hillary Clinton is spending her 69th birthday asking for support in Florida. She also accepted an endorsement from singer Adele. But it doesn't help her campaign. Adele's British.
We can't take our foot off the gas even for a short time. Every vote counts. Just ask my friend, former Vice President Al Gore.
Trump says he's going to focus on North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Florida. Nationally, the Real Clear Politics average has him down by 5 points, and a new ABC poll has him down by 9. Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. For the first time in a quarter century, the U.S. does not oppose a UN resolution condemning America's 55-year-old embargo against Cuba. The decision to abstain from voting on the measure not sitting well with congressional Republicans. Most oppose the Obama administration's move toward normalization of U.S.-Cuba relations. There are reports of damage to buildings after a 5.4 magnitude quake rattles central Italy again today. Felt in Rome, it brought down power lines and sent panicked residents into the streets. Seismologists say today's quake was actually an aftershock of the magnitude 6.2 earthquake in August. That quake devastated villages in Italy's central mountains, killing nearly 300 people. Pope Francis visited the region in the weeks that followed, offering prayers and support for those who lost loved ones. Airstrikes in Syria today kill up to 22 people, mostly children. Activists and rescue workers say warplanes hit a residential area and school complex in northern Syria. A team of first responders says at least 50 people were wounded in these raids. In a Facebook posting, activists say most of those killed were children. Iraqi troops meet fierce resistance as they close in on Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. Hundreds of ISIS fighters are flowing into northern Iraq from Syria. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight.
Brian, the coalition seeking to oust ISIS is making swifter than expected progress. More than 70 villages have been liberated and more than 800 ISIS fighters killed. There is still a long way to go, but many Iraqis already have reason to celebrate.
An Iraqi family is reunited for the first time in nearly 3 years. Mohammed Omar Mustafa, a Kurdish man from Mosul, says he was working in Iran when ISIS took over his hometown in 2014. This is the first time he's seen his sister since then. More than 1,000 people are arriving at refugee camps in northern Iraq as government forces and Kurdish Peshmerga liberate dozens of villages surrounding Mosul. One of those villages is Bartella, a historically Christian town. Today, the patriarch of the Chaldean Catholic Church in Iraq visited a church damaged by ISIS militants. He says, "We are proud of the Iraqi victory. There is some damage in the church, but damage can be repaired." It is expected to take weeks, if not months, to drive ISIS from Iraq's second largest city. But the fight against ISIS isn't limited to Iraq. Kurdish-led forces retook the town of Manbij, Syria, after 2 years under ISIS control. But dangers remain. An international rights group says homemade landmines planted by militants have killed or wounded hundreds of civilians, including dozens of children.
ISIS also placed these explosive devices in people's private homes. They put them in bags of clothes, under mattresses, under piles of shoes, and even in TV sets and in the kitchen sink.
The conflict in both Iraq and Syria is also impacting its neighbors. Archbishop Pierre Battista Pizzaballa leads the Latin Rite Catholic community in the Holy Land, which is now home to millions of refugees.
There are also different hundreds of thousands of Christians that need everything. So we are involved in helping as much as possible these communities to survive.
The Archbishop and other Catholic leaders in the Middle East call on Catholics and other Christians to pray, not just for peace, but that young people in the Middle East will reject ISIS fundamentalist ideology. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. And many of the refugees relocating to the U.S. are children.
Cass has the fan on.
Inside this middle school near San Diego, child refugees from war-torn countries are learning how to read in English. But the memories of bombings and violence are never far behind. Abdul Hamid's father disappeared 4 years ago, and his family believes he was killed.
It felt like everything fell apart.
He and his mother and 5 siblings fled Syria for Jordan. In July, they reached the U.S. They're just 7 of the more than 11,000 Syrian refugees who have arrived in the U.S. since October 2015. According to the State Department, nearly 60% are under the age of 18. Many of those kids now enrolling in schools.
We received about 70 or 80 in the last couple months, and that's significant, given that the needs of some of our children are so significant.
The Cajon Valley Union School District in California has been bolstering its English language program since first receiving Iraqi students several years ago. It's also hired more Arabic-speaking staff.
Because we have such a large and diverse student population, being able to relate, even learning a few new Arabic words, things like that, it helps the students feel more at home and let them know that they're welcome.
This year, the district began a parent academy after school to strengthen relationships with teachers and foster literacy skills at home.
There's difficulty at the start. Until now, this difficulty remains. But it's a reality we have to face. I say it again, there's difficulty in living.
For Abdul Hamid, that means learning a new language and making new friends.
مؤيد نور الدين عبد الرحيم شو اسمه
Though the one person he wishes he could see most is never far from his mind.
I think about my dad a lot.
The wounds of war stretching from Syria to El Cajon, California. French authorities declare the Calais migrant camp known as the Jungle now empty. Fires set by departing migrants accelerated evacuation plans. Thousands fleeing war and poverty have lived in squalor there, waiting for a chance to sneak across the English Channel to Britain. The main alley through the camp burned overnight, with gas canisters exploding in the heat. One aid group's truck burst into flames as migrants stood and watched. The camp will now be dismantled. Migrants are being moved to reception centers around France where they can seek asylum. The United Nations Refugee Agency says this is now the deadliest year on record for migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. At least 3,800 have died. That number is already higher than all of last year, with 2 months still to go in this year. Pope Francis urges us to welcome strangers, saying many people are forced to flee. He spoke to pilgrims today in St. Peter's Square at his weekly general audience.
Queste opere, infatti, rendono evidente che I cristiani non sono stanchi e pigri.
The Pope says the works of mercy make it clear that Christians are not tired and lazy. They see God's face in people in need of help. He says closing doors is not a solution, that it only fuels the tragedy of human trafficking. The Holy Father says solidarity is the answer, with everyone pitching in. Mary Shovlin joining us from Rome tonight. And Mary, how does the Pope tie the corporal works of mercy with Europe's migrant and refugee crisis?
Brian, he encouraged us to have an attitude of openness and not one of closure. He encouraged us to open doors and not put up walls. As we know, Europe is enduring this incredible migration crisis, millions displaced all over the continent. And he said, if we close the doors, those who remain on the other side fall victim to criminal trafficking. He said our only attitude should be that of solidarity and welcoming.
One of the corporal works of mercy he talked about, clothing the naked. Did he take us beyond the physical in his teaching?
That's a good point, Brian, because it's easy to, give a coat to our neighbor or shoes to those without shoes. But he addressed all of us in saying the spiritual nakedness that is created from an attitude of being closed in on ourselves. The spiritual nakedness of those who have lost all of their dignity through migration, those who are refugees showing up our doors, asking for everything when they have nothing. And he said that spiritual nakedness is something we also need to clothe.
And what else stands out from today's Wednesday audience to you?
Well, what stood out to me was that he mentioned America's first canonized saint, Saint Frances Cabrini, as being an example of somebody who lives these works of mercy. As we know, she emigrated from here in the 1800s, late 1800s, to New York to care for migrants, the suffering, the refugees. She founded schools and she founded hospitals. So it was nice that he held up an American saint for us all to emulate during this Jubilee of Mercy.
Mother Cabrini, certainly a great example of that. Mary Shovlin with us from Rome. Mary, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Brian.
Coming up, early voting sets new records, what that means for the presidential campaign. And the Pentagon halts a plan to force veterans to pay back re-enlistment bonuses. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Defense Secretary Ash Carter vows to resolve a conflict over California National Guard re-enlistment bonuses. For now, he's ordering the Pentagon to stop seeking repayment. Thousands of veterans were told they had to pay back re-enlistment bonuses they'd received a decade ago.
I was completely and totally in shock. I couldn't believe they were doing this to me. They said that I had received these monies in violation of federal law. They were very accusatory.
Anybody who volunteers to serve in the Armed Forces of the United States deserves our gratitude and respect, period.
The California Guard's incentive manager was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for filing false claims of more than $15 million. The Justice Department says that money was illegally paid to Guard members by recruiters trying to meet enlistment targets. Taliban insurgents killed 26 Afghan civilians after abducting them the day before in the remote central province of Ghor. This latest attack targeted the local population in one of that country's most lawless areas. The deputy provincial police chief says the slain civilians were from a group of 33 taken by the militants near the provincial capital. Those abducted were poor people from the area, mainly villagers and shepherds, including children. The leaders of Japan and the Philippines agreed to cooperate in promoting regional stability, but did not address their alliances with the U.S. Manila's relationship with Washington is strained. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is distancing the Philippines from the United States, choosing to get closer to China.
We will survive. Without the assistance of America, there may be a lesser quality of life. But I said, we will survive.
Duterte says he expects Japan to continue playing an important role in maritime security in the region, including the South China Sea. That's where Manila has territorial disputes with Beijing. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says he welcomes Duterte's recent efforts to improve ties with China. Election day is November 8th, but voters in 37 states and here in the District of Columbia have already started casting ballots. John Fortier, director of the Democracy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center, is with us. Early voting is breaking records in some states. John, why is that?
Well, there are really two kinds of early voting. Voting by mail, and then a number of states opening up their polling places for you to vote a week or two or three before the election. It's been going up for the last 25 years. Many states wanting to give their voters more opportunities, more convenience, and each time, each election, a new state comes on board. Some states are voting 100% by mail, or almost all early voting.
So I wonder, does early voting benefit one party or the other?
It doesn't really. There are sometimes times where a party will take advantage of it. So the Obama administration, Obama campaign has been very effective, or had been very effective at driving its voters to early voting sites by identifying them early and getting them locked in. But you see other states where the pattern is different. So it really is, I think it's relatively neutral between the parties, but sometimes one party will take advantage of it in a particular state.
For the voter, what are the benefits of voting in advance of Election Day, or are there any?
Well, I think the biggest benefit is convenience. People like the choice of either a site or a day that they can go, or to be able to sit with a mail ballot at their dining room table and fill out a ballot. It doesn't seem to really increase turnout. That was one of the hopes of people who implemented this, that there would be easier voting, would make it more people show up, but it does increase the convenience for the voter.
I know weather has a factor on Election Day. If it's a lousy day, fewer people vote. So the more that vote in advance, that obviously helps the election count.
Sure, and the parties know that. The parties, to the extent they can get their core voters to the polls early, they know that something could happen on Election Day, whether it's weather or an emergency that will keep them from voting. So it is in their interest to get their core voters to the polls early.
So much of the election process is electronic, just like everything in life now. With the threats of breaching some of these state systems, is the integrity of the voting process in question at all?
Well, I think there's some questions we should ask and some work we should do on our voting process, and it's very different in different states. But I do think we should calm down a bit and think about that our process is relatively secure. Even electronic voting machines, which people worry about the integrity of, they are not connected to the internet. They are standalone, and they are hard to get into. So while I would encourage states to really up their game in terms of professionalism and improving security, I think the idea of a large-scale attack on our elections is very hard to imagine.
Well, that's certainly good to know. John Fortier with the Bipartisan Policy Center. We thank you for your insight and your expertise tonight.
Great, thank you.
Up next, the debate about physician-assisted suicide trickles down to insurance providers. And Cleveland's weather prompts changes for Game 2 of the World Series. With stellar pitching, the Cleveland Indians jump out to an early one-game lead in the 2016 World Series. The Tribe blanked the Chicago Cubs 6-0 Tuesday night. With rain in tonight's forecast, Game 2 of the Fall Classic at Cleveland's Progressive Field could be delayed. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. A terminally ill California woman says she was denied coverage for her chemotherapy drugs. Stephanie Packer says her insurance company offered instead to pay for life-ending pills. This happened shortly after California passed a law permitting physician-assisted suicide. Alex Schadenberg, Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Skyping with us from Ontario, Canada. So, Alex, do you think insurance companies are favoring life-ending drugs over treatment options, I guess, to save money?
Well, assisted suicide is an awful lot cheaper than medical treatment, and that's why you're seeing insurance companies discouraging the medical treatment and encouraging assisted suicide. So there's been a few cases like this, and the most recent case, the one in California, really, brings that out, how she had her medical treatment approved previous to the assisted suicide law being passed in California, and after the law gets passed, she's being denied the medical treatment and being offered assisted suicide.
Is this happening in other states too, Oregon specifically?
Well, in Oregon a few years ago, there was 2 cases that came out in the media. There might have been many, but we had 2. There was the case of Barbara Wagner, who had recurrent lung cancer, and Randy Stroop also had cancer. Now, Barbara Wagner was the one that became very famous, and she made it very clear that being denied medical treatment but offered assisted suicide is absolutely a crazy thing. She was very upset, and it became a big media issue. Now, Stephanie Packer is saying, and it's very important that she's bringing this forward now, because Colorado right now is going to be voting on an assisted suicide initiative, a plebiscite during the election. It's on the ballot. And she's making people understand, well, if you're going to legalize assisted suicide, what are the other outcomes of this?
I wonder how these laws might change the attitudes that people have toward this end of life period.
Well, people are thinking that, this is all about, choice and autonomy. They're all thinking, oh, well, if I were in pain, maybe assisted suicide is a good situation. This is about actually eliminating choice and eliminating autonomy, because, in fact, your doctor gains the right in law to be involved with causing your death. This is a very dangerous situation. On top of it, your insurance company, they're the ones who are going to have to look at the situation, and they're saying it's an awful lot cheaper to give you a lethal drug than to give you treatment. And so the new pressure becomes, how can we turn people away from treatment, even if they don't accept assisted suicide? Assisted suicide is just one more avenue to save money.
From the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Alex Schadenberg joining us from London, Ontario. Alex, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching tonight. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We're going to leave you with pictures of Pope Francis interacting with pilgrims in St. Peter's Square, today's general audience. Good night. God bless.